go another 4 or 8 more years on this current path, we risk losing the greatest country in the history of the world. But I am here more than anything with a word of hope and optimism and encouragement. Something incredible is happening. All across Georgia, all across this country, people are waking up. I want to talk to you about 2 things. Number 1, I want to talk to you about what tomorrow looks like. And number 2, I want to talk to you about how we get there. What tomorrow looks like. What I want to do is expand on the 30-second closing I gave last night in Cleveland. In closing, I laid out the following. I said, if I am elected president, let me tell you about my very first day in office. You know, an awful lot of folks on the left, an awful lot of folks in the media, although I repeat myself, they tell you you can't change what's happening. A president can't change. The forces are too strong. There's nothing you can do about it. They want everyone here. Abandon hope, give up, and go home.
Bull.
That's exactly right. There's a second half to that word. You know, you look at how a president implements change. There's 3 avenues of change. There's executive power, there's foreign policy, and then there's legislation. You can use all 3 of them. Let's talk about all 3 of them. On the first day, you can use the first 2. The very first thing I intend to do if I'm elected president is on that first day rescind every illegal and unconstitutional executive action. You know, President Obama likes to say he has a phone and he has a pen. Well, you live by the pen, you die by the pen. And every illegal action he has put in with the stroke of a pen, I can take out with a stroke of an eraser. But in addition to the illegality coming from the White House, in unconstitutional executive orders, we've seen the entire executive branch corrupted. We've seen law enforcement corrupted. We've seen the most partisan Department of Justice in history. I'll say a great many of us in this room have seen the Planned Parenthood videos that have come out in the last couple of years. 4 of them, these are horrifying. I'll tell you, I urge every American, if you haven't seen these videos, watch these videos. Even if you're pro-choice, even if you support legalized abortion, watch these videos. Because they show senior Planned Parenthood officials laughing and sipping Chardonnay and callously, heartlessly bartering and selling the body parts of unborn children. And I would say to anyone who watches these videos, just watch them and ask, are these my values? One of those senior officials laughs. She wants to sell enough body parts to buy herself a Lamborghini. Now let me ask you, under federal criminal law, it is a felony with 10 years in prison to sell the body parts of unborn children. Does anyone believe there is even a shred of possibility the Obama Justice Department would fairly investigate Planned Parenthood, despite being caught on film confessing to multiple felonies?
Nope.
On the first day after I am sworn in as president, the Department of Justice will open an investigation into Planned Parenthood and prosecute any criminal violations. Department of Justice is not the only department corrupted under this administration. We've seen the alphabet soup. We've seen the IRS targeting American citizens for their free speech, targeting American citizens for their religious liberties, singling them out.
That's right.
At the oral argument before the Supreme Court in the shameful marriage decision, Justice Alito asked the Obama Justice Department, if you win, does that mean that the Obama IRS can then go after Christian charities, Christian universities, Christian schools, any organization that follows a biblical teaching on the Bible? And the Obama Justice Department said yes. That's a very real possibility. On the first day after I'm sworn into office, the Department of Justice and the IRS and every branch of federal government will be instructed immediately to drop all persecution of religious liberty. If you look, for example, at the Little Sisters of the Poor, an incredible organization, a Catholic charity of nuns. They've taken vows of poverty. They spend their lives caring for the poor and the elderly. Right now today, the Obama administration is litigating against the Little Sisters of the Poor, trying to impose millions of dollars of fines on the sisters under Obamacare in order to force the nuns to pay for abortion-inducing drugs and others. Now, let me give you a real simple rule of thumb. If you're litigating against nuns, you've probably done something wrong. Little Sisters of the Poor are used to receiving judicial summons from the Obama Justice Department. On the day I'm sworn in, the Little Sisters of the Poor will receive something in the mail. It will be a dismissal of their case and an end of the persecution. And accompanying that will be an invitation to the Little Sisters of the Poor to come to the White House and share their story with the world.
Yes.
When you look beyond our shores, as much chaos as this president has produced at home, if it's even possible, it's worse overseas. The fourth thing I intend to do on the first day after I'm sworn in as president is rescind this catastrophic Iranian nuclear deal.
Yes.
A couple of weeks ago, I observed if this deal goes through, it will make the Obama administration the world's leading global financier of radical Islamic terror. In response, just over a week ago from Africa, President Obama attacked me directly. Apparently, he was very dismayed I said such a thing. And I do so hate dismaying. He said that rhetoric was over the top. That was too much. You can't say such a thing. Sadly, it wasn't just Barack Obama. Mitt Romney and Jeb Bush both also criticized. Now, don't use such overheated rhetoric. Just calm down.
Do it.
Let me say something very simple. Telling the truth is not rhetoric. In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth can be a revolutionary act. And we're already in uniform. It was interesting when President Obama attacked me for saying that. He didn't actually dispute the truth of what I say. Let's review the facts. Fact number one. Iran today is the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. Fact number two. If this deal goes through, over $100 billion will flow to Iran. Fact number three, we know to an absolute certainty that billions of those dollars will go directly to Hamas, to Hezbollah, to the Houthis, to radical Islamic terrorists across the globe. Now, if there are billions of dollars in the control of the U.S. government that they willfully allow to be transferred to jihadists who use that money to murder Americans, Israelis, and Europeans, then the facts are unequivocal. And in the entire course of the president's response, he didn't once point to any organization that is a larger financier of radical Islamic terrorism than would be the Obama administration. If he finds saying that the Obama administration would become the world's leading financier of radical Islamic terrorism, if he finds that rhetoric objectionable, stop financing radical Islamic terrorism. Do not enter into a deal that leaves 4 American hostages languishing in Iranian prison. Including Pastor Saeed Abedini, an American citizen sentenced to 8 years in prison for sharing the gospel.
That's right.
Amir Hekmati, an American Marine, thrown in prison for standing up for his country.
That's right. There.
We've seen one president already, the 1970s, who allowed our hostages to languish. We don't need another one. And the fifth thing I intend to do on the first day that I'm sworn into office is begin the process of moving America's embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. I got to tell you, presidential candidates, Republicans and Democrats, have promised to do that for decades. They promise it over and over and over again. Then they get elected. They show up in the Oval Office. In their first security briefing, they say, Mr. President, there are a bunch of people in the Middle East who will be really ticked off if you acknowledge Jerusalem's the capital of Israel. Let me tell you the difference.
Let him get ticked.
Get over it.
You kind of notice they're ticked off already. You know, last time I checked, it wasn't a bunch of ticked off Presbyterians that flew planes into those buildings in New York or Washington. The difference between me and the other fine individuals on that debate stage last time is that when I say I will do something, I will do exactly what I say I will. So that's day one. There are 365 days in a year, 4 years in a presidential term, and then 4 more years in the second term. By the end of it, the one group that I apologize, their health care premiums are going to go through the roof, is all of the newspaper reporters and editors and everyone who's checked themselves into therapy. And what a constitutionally conservative government in this country looks like. And I would note, for our friends in the media, my assumption assumption is right now the headline is written, Cruz admits he'll skyrocket health insurance premiums. In addition to executive action, in addition to foreign policy, there's legislation. And I'll tell you, I'm running on two big legislative priorities. Number one, if I'm elected president,
Win.
I like this. We will repeal every word of Obamacare. The sad reality is there are an awful lot of politicians in Washington, including a lot of Republicans, who are largely resigned to Obamacare being a permanent feature of our economy. They'll campaign every 2 years on repealing Obamacare, but they have no intention or belief that it will ever happen. Let me tell you how you change that. You change the rules in Washington. I intend to make 2016 a referendum on repealing Obamacare. You know, there's an old joke, buddy, that politics is Hollywood for ugly people. My wife Heidi tells me I resemble everyone. How do you change the rules in Washington? You change the cost-benefit analysis so that elected officials in Washington suddenly realize, holy cow, if I stand in the way of this, I might lose my job. If you come out of the election in November 2016 with a mandate from the people, we've seen that before. We saw it in 1980 with the Reagan Revolution. When the people rise up in sufficient numbers, suddenly it changes all of the incentives in Washington. And everyone says, I ain't getting in the way of that. And that is what is strong enough to turn this country. And then the second major legislative agenda that I'm campaigning on is fundamental tax reform, adopting a simple flat tax. American can fill out his or her taxes on a postcard. And when we do that, we should abolish the IRS. There are about 90,000 employees at the IRS. We need to padlock that building. Take all 90,000 and put them down on our southern border. Now, to our friends in the media, I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek. But if you think about it, imagine you traveled thousands of miles in the blazing sun. You're swimming across the Rio Grande. The first thing you see is 90,000 IRS agents. You turn around and go home. Real change is possible. But I'll tell you, the reason I'm so optimistic is the men and women gathered here in this room. The book of Ecclesiastes tells us there's nothing new under the sun. I think where we are today is very, very much like the late 1970s. The parallels between Jimmy Carter and Barack Obama are uncanny. Same failed economic policies, same misery, stagnation, and malaise. Same feckless and naive foreign policy. In fact, the exact same countries, Russia and Iran, openly laughing at and mocking the President of the United States. Why does that analogy give me so much hope and optimism? Because we know how that story ends. The late 70s and 1980, millions of Americans rose up and became the Reagan Revolution. And it didn't come from Washington. Washington despised Ronald Reagan. If you see a candidate who Washington embraces, run and hide. It came from the American people.
That's right.
The reason I'm so optimistic is the same thing that's happening all over. We launched our campaign about 4 months ago, March 23rd. The next day, the New York Times wrote, apoplectically, Cruz cannot win because the Washington elites despise him. I kind of thought that was the whole point of the campaign. If you think things are going great in Washington, if you think we're headed the right trajectory, we just need someone to fiddle around the edges just to manage the descent of this nation. And you know what? I ain't your guy. But if you think Washington is fundamentally broken, that it's not listening to the American people, that it is sucking power and money and debt into Washington, and we need to bring power out of Washington and back to we the people, that's what this campaign is. Let me give you one simple metric to show just how much that has happened. The New York Times went on to say, well, look, maybe the Grassroots will be approved. But he ain't going to have any money. All the money is controlled by the lobbyists in Washington, and they're all with other guys. Everyone just filed their fundraising reports a couple of weeks ago. Out of 17 Republican candidates, do you know which campaign raised the most hard money for their campaign? In just over 3 months, we raised over $14.3 million. Second place was Jeb Bush at 11.4. Now, Jack, if I'd have told you 4 months ago that we were going to outraise every Republican in the field, including outraising Jeb Bush by $3 million, you'd have said I was bark at the moon crazy. Heck, I'd have said that. Let me tell you why and how.
Is that money, Trump?
Alas, no. But he offered last night, and I did in the commercial break. I said, Donald, we'll take that check right now. The $14.3 million that we raised came from over 175,000 contributions.
That's more than 30.
It is. In all 50 states, all 5 territories. Even 57. We got those extra 7. The average contribution was $68. This country going to tedcruz.org. 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 It's tedcruz.org. That is the power of the grassroots. That is the power of what y'all are doing. Listen, Georgia is going to play a critical role in the Republican Party. We're going to have the first 3 states, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and then boom, we're going to hit the March primary. Super Tuesday, the SEC primary.
Yes, SEC.
Now look, as Texans, I can agree with y'all on almost anything except football. But let me say, it is a great thing to have southern states, to have conservative states up and down the South. Voting in early March, Georgia is going to play a critical role. Georgia and Texas, we're voting on the same day.
Here, here.
And the men and women in this room, Georgia is going to play a critical role of ensuring that the next Republican nominee for president is a real conservative, a genuine conservative who stands for the Constitution and stands for the people. And with that, I'm happy to answer or dodge any questions. Yes, sir.
Steve Sorensen, U.S. Army Chief Warrant Officer.
Fantastic. Thank you for your service.
Every morning I put on my uniform, pretty much makes me a target. Label, especially. Anybody that wants to do us harm knows we're not harmed. They know that we don't have the right to it. So I got two questions. Current bill introduced in the House, 3146, would allow me to carry my personal firearm while I'm on duty. I'm pretty sure we can count on the current president vetoing that. What will you do about that? My second question, same question, different bill, constitutional carry. What can you say about both of those?
Well, sir, let me start by just saying again, thank you for your service. Thank you for standing up every day. When it comes to standing with the men and women of our military, and when it comes to standing for the Second Amendment, I'm reminded of the line from the movie Jerry Maguire. You had me at hello. Absolutely. Our soldiers and sailors and airmen and marines should be able to keep and bear arms and defend themselves and shouldn't be set as This is an issue I've been pressing and leading on in the Senate. I serve on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and I've been pressing for 2 years now, both Democratic chairman and Republican chairman, that we need to hold hearings examining why it is the military prohibits our servicemen and women from defending themselves. It makes no sense. If we can't trust the men and women of our military with weapons, we got a lot bigger problems. It's actually a great point. They won't let Marines carry guns, but they want the Ayatollah to have a nuclear weapon. What on earth is going on there? So look, you may be right that this president would veto that. I can promise you, number one, as president, I would sign the legislation in a heartbeat. Number two, as president, it wouldn't take legislation. As president, I would call in the newly appointed Secretary of Defense and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the chairmen of each of the service branches into the Oval Office to explain why exactly it is that they don't trust the servicemen and women under their command with their own personal fire. Let me mention a broader point on the Second Amendment. Because it goes, this cuts more broadly. How do you differentiate among 10 candidates or 17 or 146? I can't keep track. Particularly because everyone is a campaign conservative. Everyone says, gosh diddly, I'm the most conservative guy that ever lived. Did you notice last night not a single person on that stage said, "Hi, I'm an establishment moderate swish. I stand for liberty." They don't say that. They all pretend to be us. I think this Republican primary comes down to one word: trust. We're tired of being lied to. When I was running for Senate, I used to point out, I say, look, every candidate has an issues page on their website. They have a series of issues, A, B, C, D, and E. And they're all word for word the same. If you print out 5 statewide Republicans, print out their issues pages, put them side by side, it's like they're reading from a script. And I would point out to folks that if you went to our website, tedcruz.org, that one of the first things people noticed, we didn't have an issues page. We have a page labeled a proven record. It says, for far too long, politicians have said one thing and done another. Every one of us should ask any candidate that shows up in front of us, you say you believe these principles. Show me. When have you stood up and fought for them? When have you bled for them? And what have you done? As the scriptures say, you shall know them by their fruits. And so I point out, I say, look, in the state of Texas, every candidate running for office, on the Second Amendment, there's a right answer. I support the Second Amendment. Unless you're clinically insane, that's the right answer in Texas and Georgia for that matter. Now, the point I'd make on the campaign trail, if you went to our website, one of the first things people noticed is, I actually didn't say that I supported the Second Amendment. Didn't say a word about what was hidden in the deep recesses of my home. What I did say is, as the Solicitor General of Texas, I led a coalition of 31 states before the United States Supreme Court defending the individual right to keep and bear arms, and we won a landmark decision upholding that fundamental right. To the 2010 NRA's Carter Knight Freedom Fund Award, given every year to a leading defender of the Second Amendment in the United States. That's the difference between a proven record of a consistent conservative and someone who's just talking on the campaign. So you asked about constitutional carry. Absolutely yes. I voted for it. I fought for it. And I will always, always, always fight to defend the Second Amendment right to keep it up.
Biggest promises I've followed all these years is the Republican platform pledge of reduced government. I haven't seen anything. It's doubled since 1968. What I would like to see something happen is the way they introduce reductions in emissions, where they say, okay, after this year, we're going to be at 3% reduction. After the next year, we're going to be at 6% reduction, and so forth. I always wondering if you would consider, at the end of each one of your term years, saying that we will be at a percentage less in government, and by the end of your first term, we'll be at 20% less. I think something like that would be very, very helpful, because it would give us some solid targets to look at.
Right.
And a good start would be closing the IRS.
So let me talk about that, first of all, in the broader context of debt and deficits and government spending, and then let me address your specifics, but let me take the broader principles first. Our national debt in 6.5 years has gone from 10 trillion to over 18 trillion. It's larger than our entire economy. What we're doing to our kids and grandkids is fundamentally immoral. and we've got to stop it. Now, why doesn't it happen? It doesn't happen because of what I call the Washington cartel. You know, I've got a book that just came out a few weeks ago called The Time for Truth. I spend a lot of time in the book talking about the Washington cartel, talking about career politicians in both parties in Washington who get in bed with lobbyists and special interests and grow and grow and grow. You don't get an $18 trillion debt without a whole lot of bipartisan agreement. Here's how you cut a bipartisan spending agreement in Washington. You say, I'll spend for your project, your project, your project, your project, your project, your project, your project. Okay, we're done. $1 trillion, and the only people who lose are the taxpayers, our kids, and our grandkids. What we've got to have is leadership in Washington that will stand up to Washington. One of the reasons why on that debate stage I say, look, it's all fine and good to point to some time you say you stood up to the Democrats. But when have you stood up to leadership in your own party? And if I'm elected president, I can promise you that I'll tell leaders in both parties, if you pass corporate welfare, if you pass pork, I will veto it. That's one of the most important ways you rein it in, is there's so many special subsidies and giveaways for giant corporations and special interests that we've got to get everyone out of the business of looting the taxpayer. Now, beyond that, the other major thing when it comes to debt, there's no factor that's more important than growth. Economic growth. If you look historically, our economy's grown 3.3% a year. There are only 2 4-year periods where growth averaged less than 1% a year. 1978 to 1982, coming out of Jimmy Carter, and 2008 to 2012. If we can get back to historic levels of growth, 3, 4, 5%, suddenly the numbers turn around dramatically. You look at the last time we had 4 years of stagnant growth. Ronald Reagan came into office in 1981. He passed tax reform and regulatory reform, the same 2 central legislative plans I'm running on. The result was incredible economic growth. By 1984, the 4th year of Reagan's presidency, the economy was growing 7.2% a year. Booming, millions of people lifted out of poverty into the middle class, into prosperity. Young people, I see a lot of young people here. A lot of young people today are scared. They're coming out of school. They don't know if they're going to get jobs. They don't know if they're going to get anything. They get a skill, work towards a career. When you've got booming growth in small businesses, young people come out of school, you've got 3, 4, 5 job opportunities. You've got an exciting future ahead because the economy's growing, and you see 2 things happen to the national debt when that happens. Number one, expenditures start going down as people go off unemployment, they go off disability, they go off food stamps, they go off of the different welfare programs. But then they've got jobs they're now paying into the system, so you get a double win. You want to address the deficit and the debt, get growth back to historic levels, and then, with respect to spending altogether, I intend to fight hard for a constitutional amendment of a balanced budget.
But what about reducing the size of government?
Yes, yes, and yes.
How much? When?
All right, so here's part of the challenge of setting that. You know, it's actually interesting. You talked about reducing it 20%. You don't actually need to reduce it 20%. For example, there's one option called a penny plan, which simply reduces it a penny each year. And within just a few years, it all comes into balance. You got a part of the problem with Washington is this bogus, they do Enron-style accounting. So everything has a built-in growth rate. If you slightly reduce the rate of growth, everyone howls in Washington, it's a cut. Now, in the real world, if the number today is bigger than the number yesterday, it ain't a cut. What's missing is the leadership to take it on. And I'll tell you part of the math that makes it complicated. Is 2/3 of the federal budget are entitlements. It's things like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. So when it comes to how Washington budgets, they deal with entitlements on one hand and so-called discretionary spending on the other. You cannot balance the federal budget without taking on fundamental entitlement. Math doesn't work. 40 cents of every dollar we're spending is borrowed. If you abolished the entire federal government, fired the Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force, shut down the FBI, our budget would just balance. If you shut everything down, then that math doesn't work. You've got to address entitlement reform. Now, for years, people have been afraid to do that. It's been the third rail of politics. I think the way to do that is to level with people and tell the truth. Let's take Social Security, for example. What the Democrats are doing is irresponsible. They're letting it careen towards bankruptcy. Social Security is a fundamental bulwark of our society that people rely on. And we need to step up and show the leadership to save and preserve Social Security. And let me tell you what that looks like briefly. Number one, for seniors on Social Security or those near retirement, there should be no changes whatsoever. We have made promises. People have ordered their financial affairs. Counting on those promises, we need to honor those commitments. But for younger workers, look, I'm 44. People my age, it is hard to find someone my generation who thinks Social Security will be around for us. That presents an opportunity for reform, to go to younger workers and say, let's reform this. 3 simple reforms. Number one, gradually increase the retirement age for younger workers, where you have time to plan on it and to know what's coming. Number 2, change the rate of increase of benefits so that it matches inflation rather than exceeding inflation. And number 3, allow younger workers to keep a portion of their tax payments, in a personal account that they own, they control. Yes, sir. Hi, Thomas.
And I don't like the way I'm learning math at school. And when I try to understand the way I didn't always get the mark wrong. And upstairs, we did a little grade and started going to the book club. And how do you think about Common Core?
Thomas, what grade are you? You're in 5th grade. Well, Common Core right now is something the federal government is doing, where you've got bureaucrats in Washington who are deciding and trying to force a national curriculum on states and on local governments. So the people deciding what you're being taught in your school, the people setting those math standards, it should be the local school. It should be people right here in Georgia who are accountable. They're accountable to your parents, they're accountable to your grandparents, and they can be, if they're teaching something that doesn't make sense, look, if you're on the local school board, you're going to run into the people at the grocery store. You're going to hear very directly from the people whose kids you're in charge of teaching. But Common Core takes all of that out of the local school board, and even out of the state, takes it all in Washington, D.C. into a giant building with a bunch of people that frankly aren't listening to your parents or grandparents or anybody else. So your question, what do I think of Common Core? I think we should repeal every word of Common Core. And let me say further, Thomas, with regard to that, the way the administration is forcing Common Core on people is through control of what's called race to the top funds. Basically, it's massive federal dollars that they're using to pressure states to accept federal funds. I talked about the first day I'm president. One of the things I will do within the first week I'm president is the federal government will stop forcing Common Core on the states. I think it's just there for looks.
Right. U.S. Army retired.
Fantastic.
I'm going on a limb and say your haircut probably didn't cost $600.
That would be correct.
3 questions really. Having been in the military, like that last time Congressman Kingston ran for office, I went his campaign committee. If I were to pay someone to rob a gas station, I would be guilty of the same crime, called aiding and abetting a crime, right? When illegal immigrants come across the border and they are given benefits, is that not aiding and abetting a crime? A couple of emails gets the FBI investigating him and him kicked out after 30 plus years of extraordinary service to this country.
Right.
Hillary Clinton has already been proven to have multiple emails in multiple places, and yet she's still running for presidency. Now, if Congress has the power of the purse, why have they not stopped benefits to illegal immigrants? And why is she still walking around free?
Sir, those are two tremendously important questions. Let me address them one at a time. Let's start initially with illegal immigration. You know, I talked about the Washington cartel. Let's have some real straight talk about what's happening in Washington. When it comes to Democrats support illegal immigration. Let me give you a statistic that will horrify you. In the year 2013, the Obama administration released over 104,000 criminal illegal aliens. In the year 2013, the Obama administration released 196 murderers who were here illegally. They had homicide convictions. 196. The year 2013, they released over 400 rapists who had sexual assault convictions and were here illegally. The year 2013, they released over 16,000 drunk drivers who were here illegally. 2 weeks ago, we had a hearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee where I had the head of immigration enforcement in front of me, and I asked her, how many murderers did the Obama administration release yesterday? I don't know, she said. How many rapists? I don't know. How many drunk drivers? I don't know. I can tell you this. In a Cruz administration, the answer to that would be zero. But you talked about benefits for illegal aliens, and that's something that continually grows. And here's the problem with the cartel. The Democrats support illegal immigrants and the illegal immigration. But the sad truth of it is an awful lot of the Republicans do.
That's right.
Because they're in bed with the lobbyists in Washington who just view illegal immigration as cheap labor. So that when we're fighting both parties together. Last night in Cleveland, out of 10 candidates there, a majority of the candidates standing on that stage had publicly, vocally, vigorously supported amnesty for years or even decades. You look at the Chuck Schumer amnesty plan. That was co-sponsored, authored, and championed by Marco Rubio. When Chuck Schumer and Marco Rubio introduced that, Jeb Bush vocally, aggressively, vigorously supported the Schumer amnesty. Likewise, Scott Walker vocally, vigorously, aggressively supported the Schumer amnesty. Now listen, amnesty is something that goes, it's not just another policy issue, it goes to foundational issues. When Obama says he wants to fundamentally transform this country, he means it. There are 7 billion people on the face of this planet. An awful lot of them would love to come to the United States of America. Now, legal immigration, we have always welcomed and celebrated. Those who follow the rule of law and come to America, Americans by choice, is what Reagan called legal immigrants. The Obama plan is simple. Allow millions of people to come here illegally. Grant them amnesty, make them citizens, and have them, they believe, vote for Democrats forever, keep them in power. Now, we saw an election in 2012 where Republicans nominated a candidate who could not oppose the President Obama. You think about it, in 2012, we sought out and nominated, out of 7 billion people on the planet, the one person on earth who had actually designed and implemented a plan just like Obamacare. You literally could have walked down the street and said, "Excuse me, sir, have you ever designed and implemented a plan like Obamacare?" No? Okay, great, you're our nominee. In 2012, we picked the one person who couldn't run against Obama on Obamacare. In 2016, if we nominate one of the multiple candidates on that stage who have vocally, vigorously, repeatedly advocated amnesty, then fast forward to the debates next year, I can promise you when they're standing next to Hillary Clinton, just like there wasn't a whit of difference between Obama and Romney on Obamacare, there won't be a whit of difference between the Republican and the Democrat on amnesty, because they both agree in the same policy that's fundamentally wrong and damaging this country. This campaign is all about you. The second question you raised about Hillary Clinton. Listen, this is the most partisan, lawless Department of Justice in history. Now, we have heard reports that they may be investigating Hillary Clinton. Shockingly. I'll believe it when I see it. You know, I'm an alumnus of the U.S. Department of Justice. I was an Associate Deputy Attorney General of the Department of Justice. I was the Solicitor General of the state of Texas. It matters that law enforcement be fair and impartial and apply to everyone, that it not be a partisan weapon to be used against anyone. That's what the Department of Justice has been. So, for example, I'll give an example. It's a little bit different than the Hillary example, but it's an example of what DOJ should be doing. 813 days ago, the IRS scandal broke of the IRS targeting individual citizens. President Obama said he was angry, and the American people had a right to be. The 813 days that have passed, not a single person has been indicted.
That's right.
Many of the victims of the illegal targeting have not even been interviewed. And we've discovered that the Department of Justice appointed to head the investigation a major Democratic donor who's given over $6,000 to President Obama and the Democratic Party. So I've asked both Eric Holder and Loretta Lynch in the Judiciary Committee. Said, listen, attorneys general in both parties have demonstrated independence and been willing to stand up to the president who appointed them. So, for example, when Elliot Richardson faced credible evidence of wrongdoing by Richard Nixon, he appointed a special prosecutor, Archibald Cox, to investigate the evidence and find out the truth. And likewise, when Janet Reno, a Democrat, discovered credible evidence of wrongdoing against Bill Clinton, she appointed a special prosecutor, Robert Fisk, to investigate the evidence, regardless of politics. both Eric Holder and Loretta Lynch, I've asked, would you demonstrate the same fidelity to law, the same integrity of the Constitution that your predecessors, both Republican and Democrat, have shown? Both of them give some simple one-word answers: no. And it is profoundly dangerous to our nation when the Department of Justice is treated as a partisan arm of the Democratic National Committee. But let me close with a simple observation. Help is on the way.
Can Bobby Smith please come to the stage? Is he still here? Bobby Smith. Raise your hand. There he is. You can bring your granddaughter too. And Senator Cruz, could we please ask your wife to come on stage as well? As well as Amy Carter and Libby Kingston.